put out a full preview of that. You can go check that out. But I also wanted to see what your guys' burning questions were that I didn't necessarily answer in that preview. So we put out a call on Twitter and on YouTube, and we took your questions, the most popular ones, the most frequently asked ones, and I'm going to try to answer what I can. Kicking things right off, probably the most popular question we got was, what is driving like in the game? That's not really something I talked about during the preview itself, but it's a totally fair question because you are going to spend a lot of time driving around Night City, and it just didn't sort of strike me as very notable, I guess, is my impressions of it. It wasn't bad. It wasn't like, Gran Turismo. You're not going to, it doesn't feel like a crazy, crazy driving game or anything like that, but it felt smooth enough. I enjoyed just kind of seeing the sights. The interiors of cars and the looks of cars are really, really immaculately detailed. Notably, I spent most of my time driving cars in third person and then motorcycles in first person, and that's mostly a personal preference. Like, I don't really like driving in most games in first person, but motorcycles, I felt like I actually really, really loved driving motorcycles even more than cars in this game because they were so agile, right? Like, you could get through little spots, you could go through twists and turns, you could weave in and out of people, and because Night City is a very dense city full of lots of roads, you're gonna be taking a lot of turns. Bilal DevTech on Twitter specifically asked if the driving felt slow, because it apparently looked slow in some of the gameplay previews. Some of the earlier worse cars you drive are definitely slower, but at one point I stole a really, really high-end sports car, and that was going much, much faster in a much more noticeable way. So it's going to vary throughout the game. Another common question we got on YouTube was that from some of the gameplay videos out there, the world looked very empty, that there weren't many people in it, there wasn't much stuff around. And that's something I think I probably only comes across in like the gameplay trailer. When I was playing the game, it felt like there were a lot of people, especially when you're walking around busy sort of market areas. It really, really feels like a populated world. That wasn't really a concern of mine. When you're moving faster, and especially in certain areas like the outskirt areas, when you're kind of getting out of Night City proper, those areas definitely are less populated, but that's also the flip side where you're going to see, a lot more nature, a lot more cactuses and plants and that sort of thing. It's pretty cool how much the neighborhoods like that can feel diverse from each other. I liked that part. And so no, I wouldn't say that the world felt empty in my experience. A very popular question from our YouTube was from Daniel Harrison, who asked, how dense would you say the verticality is to this game, i.e. how many of those skyscrapers are explorable? And that was similar to another question from Adam Garcia, who also asked how many interiors are accessible, buildings, rooms, not necessarily separate cells. And this is maybe going to be sound like a disappointing answer, but I don't think it's as disappointing in practice as it will, which is not many of them, right? I think there's this perception that maybe this is one of those games that it's not a huge, huge open world. It's big, but it's not as massive as some other RPGs, but there's all these buildings, there's all these places you can go. Most of the buildings, like in many city games, are not actually enterable at any time. And similarly, when you get in an elevator to go up to and kind of the scope of Night City is not just, you can go into every building, but, a quest can send you into any building, right? That's a very important distinction, is that you can get a quest that sends you into a building you've never been in that was 2 blocks down from where you started the game, and suddenly it's a completely fresh area and familiar territory. Another common question we got was about Melee, which I didn't talk about much in my preview. L Game on YouTube asked, how is the Melee? Do you think it's possible to do a full Melee playthrough? And Blake James also asked, how is Melee combat, katanas, etc.? Melee is okay, right? It's not, I said this in my preview, combat wasn't exactly the thing that blew me away anyway, and I think Melee kind of just folds into that. It was really fun. I did find a katana at one point, and it was extremely fun to put some points into perks that were higher melee damage, get some cyber augments that gave me more armor, that sort of thing, and just run into the fray and start cutting people up. That was really, really fun. The melee system itself is actually fairly sort of simple, right? It's got a light attack, a heavy attack to break guards, and then you can guard yourself and also press guard right when you get hit, right before you get hit, to do a kind of counter punch to only go melee. But that might differ for you. Another common question we got was about life paths. Specifically, Jack Jones asked, how significant is your life path choice? And Sloan asked, how often do you wonder how different the story would be if you had chosen a different path? I think this is a great question. You get to choose one of 3 life paths at the beginning of the game. It's a big decision right away, but I wouldn't overly stress too much about it. The life path determines the very, very, very beginning of the game. You kind of get a very customized intro. And then the feeling I got from after that, and obviously I haven't played through the whole game, so I don't know the major impacts if it comes into play later, if other stuff differs later. But basically, what it was is that I then got different unique dialogue choices for that life path. So depending on what life path you choose. Balaji Asari on YouTube asked, how does character customization have an impact on the game/gameplay, considering it's a first-person perspective game? This is a fun question because the answer is not a whole ton. This is specifically, at least when it comes to cosmetic customization. I kind of jokingly said this to some people earlier in the week, but essentially make sure you're happy with your fingernail choice. There are a lot of fingernail options, and that's what you're going to probably be seeing most in terms of your character customization, because there are no, cutscenes where you're seeing your character in third person or things like that. I did see my character every time I open the menu when you're equipping things, right? And you do see your character if you're driving in third person, so there's plenty of opportunities. Occasionally you look in mirrors, things like that. Jessica Starr on Twitter says, I'd like to ask about the class system. How much can you multi-class? Did you see respec options or perks, skills that feel game-changing versus just percentage increases? Yeah, these are all really, really important things that I didn't have a ton of time to touch on, and also I didn't get a ton of time to dig too deeply into in my 16 hours, because this is a deep, deep game. To be clear, there's not really a class system, right? You don't pick, warrior or hacker or whatever. You just sort of pick the attributes that you want, and then you focus on upgrading perks in that way. The thing I really liked about the system is that it was extraordinarily flexible. Like, even if I put all my attributes into physical body, right, the stat called body, then I realized kind of halfway through the game, like, oh man, I'm really hacking a lot. I'm really enjoying that. Your perks for hacking get experience points for that just by doing that thing. So even Alexander Almas on YouTube asked, you seem unimpressed with the gunplay. Can you speak on more why you felt that way besides bullet sponge? This is something I alluded to earlier. It's a little bit of a tricky thing to explain because it's a lot due to feel. Like, I felt like the weapons were just kind of fine early on, right? Like, they were pretty high recoil. It felt like enemies were pretty bullet spongy, could take a lot of hits, and there wasn't just a lot to wow me. What I will say is that and I do mention this in my preview, as I got deeper into that system, I started unlocking new abilities, new augments, new weapons that were kind of changing it up so that it was less just like a first-person shooter. I think when you're just comparing it to a first-person shooter, because that's what it looks like on the surface, it is an underwhelming sort of gun. Michael on Twitter asked, what's the difficulty like? This is a really good question. There were 4 difficulty options that I saw, going from basically story mode, where it's just super, super easy. I played on normal, which is the second from the highest, basically hard above it. And it was challenging at times. It really was. You've got to be smart about how you play. This being an RPG, you're going to be quick saving a lot. I was saving before absolutely every single fight. There's going to be some save scumming involved there for some people, for sure, because it's easy to get overwhelmed and it's easy to make a mistake, or just kind of get caught off guard and get killed, and you got to reload a checkpoint. That said, this also depends a lot on what sort of missions you're on, right? Because every mission has different levels, and so if you go into an area of Night City and start taking on gang members that are listed as a very high danger level on the map, you're probably going to get your butt kicked. And there are these enemies that are marked Shawshank Saxena on YouTube asked, you told us to temper expectations and that the game is a slow burn. How would you compare it to Red Dead Redemption 2? Now, I'm going to say something controversial right away, which is I didn't really enjoy Red Dead Redemption 2 very much. I thought it was a beautiful game. I thought it was a technically impressive game. I thought it was way too slow and just kind of tedious in a lot of its activities. This does not for something like 4 hours before you even leave it to fight your first zombie. That's a slow-paced RPG. And I'm not saying Cyberpunk is that. And finally, a quick one I wanted to hit was from House of Tides on YouTube, who asked, is there any indication that there's an endgame Skyrim-esque Radiant Quest content that repeats, continues, and is sort of infinitely replayable after the main story, that sort of thing? This is a great question. I just didn't want to leave it hanging, but I don't know. 16 hours in is hard to tell in what is probably going to be a very, very large RPG. I didn't see any immediate indication of that sort of thing, but obviously I was very, very early on, so, we'll have to see when the final thing comes out. But I hope I hit your questions. Thank you very much to everyone who sent them in to us. This was